Now I've taken my marked shirt with the top fabric, the outer fabric, and the lining pinned together, marked with a seam line to my sewing machine. Next thing I do is I take one of the 25-4 tags and I fold it in half so that the raw edges are together like that, and placing it with the print side up and the fold in, I go to the front of the shirt and I place the tag. And I'll take a couple of pins and put it on either side of the tag to try to keep it in place when I sew my seam. So here's my little tag here. It's tucked in under there, and I'll place a pin. All right, now here's the top shoulder in the front. Here's the next back shoulder. I'm going to start to sew my shirt on the bottom underneath the back shoulder. So I put my presser foot down and I stitch now on this line, not a 1/4 of an inch away, on the line. Now as I get to the corner, I want to stop with my needle down, and I'll take the pin out. I'm going to set my machine so that the needle will go down, but when I stop, the presser foot will pick up a little bit, like that. So I can easily turn the fabric under my needle, and I'll turn the corner. And sometimes you can only take 3 stitches and then you got to stop and turn again around a curve. And that's just the way it goes. So now I'm going to take out that first pin on one side of my tag, then the second, and I can just scoot around the shirt. Get up to the front shoulder, take the pin. I'm stopping with the needle down. Press her foot up. Maybe take 3 stitches, maybe 4. Turn, turn. As I get around there, I usually try to fold the rest of the shirt in a little bit on the bed of my machine. So it seems like I'm always storing things on my machine bed. As I get to the underarm area, a few stitches, needle down, turn. Needle down, turn. If you don't have an automatic needle down and presser foot lift on your machine, it's a great feature if you ever go to look for a new machine. If you have to do it manually on your machine, you want to sew on a featherweight that doesn't have that kind of option, or your machine isn't computerized, it all can be done with just moving the hand wheel and effectively using the take-up lever on the presser foot. This just makes it a little lazy for the sewer, but that's the kind of sewer I am, pretty lazy. Alright, so now that shoulder tab is done. Now I'm approaching the middle of the back. Another area where you have to stop and pivot. Now, my feeling is by leaving this fabric in between the shoulder tabs before I sew it, rather than cutting it out, it gives my shirt a little extra stability. And it seems to help me from stretching my flannel fabric, especially, out of position. I just feel more confident that my shirt's gonna lie nice and flat, and it will be easy to turn my shirt right side out and get my seams to fall flat once the shirt is turned. Here I am going around the armhole, just a couple of stitches, stop, pivot, sew. Gather the rest of this. You can hear the pins on my machine bed falling because I'm always throwing them on the bed. Not a good habit. I was a little bit off the sewing line there, but I'm not terribly concerned about it. As long as your stitching is smooth and pretty darn close to that line, you're going to be fine. What you don't want is pokes and points, zigs and zags. Alright, now I'm coming down the other side of the front. Get that little curve in. Front corner again. Stop and pivot. Stop and pivot, and then you can sew right across the bottom. I'm going to stop about 3 fingers away from where I started stitching on the bottom of the shirt. So I put 3 fingers down, and when I get to those fingers I stop, because I know that's enough space right there between the end of the stitching and the beginning of the stitching for me to slide my hands up and turn the shirt right side out. So once I'm sure all my pins have been removed, the next thing I do is trim my shirt with a pinking shear. These are my pinking shears. They're made by Mundile. I don't know if you can see that. They have a lovely padded handle here. They're nice and sharp, and they are not the pinking shears that I used in high school. Those have long gone. You have to have a good pair of pinking shears. So I'm leaving about a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you feel like you need that line to cut on, you could always lay your full template on top of the shirt and draw that line, but I feel that I can estimate pretty well what the 1/4 inch is, and I certainly don't put any more than that on the top of the shirt when I go around the corners, and in the bottom when I go around the armpit. I want that seam allowance trimmed very tightly because I don't want a lot of extra fabric on those curves. hope you can see what I'm doing. I know my lighting is not looking great on this video. It's really dark and cloudy in Florida today. We're getting a thunderstorm any minute. It's much easier to do this trimming when you're not trying to keep it in the camera. So it does go faster when I'm on my own. Last shoulder tab down the front, back to where I started. Okay, now the entire shirt has now been trimmed using the pinking shear. And I might take a sharp scissor, if I have one handy here, and put a tiny snip in the armpit there, and one there, and one there. Maybe the neck. One there, and one here. So I know it's hard to see on camera, but I have a little snip there, and I have a little snip here. And that's just going to help these seam allowances to lie flat when I turn the shirt inside, right side out. So now I'm going to take my 2 fingers and I'm going to insert them in this opening that I have here. And I'm going to scoot my fingers up to the back tabs. And I make bunny ears. Take those 2 tabs and pull right side out. And then I push the rest of the shirt right side out through that hole. And I'm going to do that as quickly as I can, but it does take a minute. There's one shoulder tab, and there's the other 2 that I had my fingers in. And there's the last right there. Okay. Now what I use to do all my poking is a chopstick. So here's my handy dandy chopstick, and I insert that in the hole, and I poke out the bottom corners, and I kind of rub that chopstick along the seam there. And now I will poke the top tabs, and I really give it a good push. Next tabs. Get those guys out. Next one. You see, I go all the way around the top of the shirt tab, and I really give it a good push. And that really helps to make the tabs more rounded rather than pointy when you top stitch. And here's my little 25-4 tag. That looks good. And then I'm all set to top stitch. I will tuck the raw edges of the hole in so that when I sew across the bottom of the shirt right there, I don't have to sew that by hand. I'm going to catch it with my top stitching. I like to top stitch my shirts very close to the edge of the shirt. And that's because I want the top stitching to be not only decorative, but I want it to be functional. I want it to help support that seam so that the shirt stays intact through washings in the hospital, which are not particularly gentle. So I'm going to put my presser foot down and I'm going to move my needle over just like that. And I have the inside of this right toe of my open toe foot is where I'm going to keep the edge of the shirt as I top stitch. I'm going to keep in my hand this little thread pick. It's called a soft touch thread pick. It's made by Clover. It has a very tiny hook on the bottom, and I can insert it right where my seam is and pull the seam to the edge of the shirt so that I get a nice effect when I'm top stitching. Sometimes when you turn your shirts, you'll have seam that's tucked in like that, and you can top stitch that, but then the shirt isn't going to be the right size. So you always have to make sure that you've pulled the seam all the way to the edge, all around the shirt. And I mention that because we have a lot of volunteers that send shirts in, and I know they don't always get those seams pulled out all the way. So this is a great helpful tool. You can also use a pin, a large pin. Sometimes I just roll those seams between my fingers and get them placed. That works, but you have to get the seam pulled out all the way to the edge. Okay, so we're going to top stitch. Here we go. Now I'm coming up to the hole that I left for turning the shirt. And I want to make sure that my seam allowance is tucked under. And I try to get any threads that may be sticking out. I try to get them turned in also. So let's see. I think that looks okay. Might give just a little bit more under there. Sometimes I'll use this tool to press that down. Keep it nice and flat. It's like a nice finger pressing before it goes through the top stitch. Now let's see. Okay, that looks good. Okay, now we get to the first corner, and it's, you know, needle down, presser foot up, pivot. Out here, where the front of the shirt curves, that's a common place for the seam to be tucked under a little bit. So I always want to get my little thread pick in there and pull those seams out to the edge. and then I run the back of the thread pick along the fabric, and that gives it a little pressing. Makes it have the edge look a little crisper, I think. All right, we're going up here. The shoulder tabs are another place where things can get tucked in, so I check, pull them out. Now you're going to take just a couple little stitches, pull out the seam, couple little stitches. Okay, now I can turn. Now, the next thing I do is I make sure that as I'm stitching this underarm area, that my shirt is curved in the underarm. I don't pull it straight. If you pull it straight, it makes a lump in the underarm. And if you're getting a lump in your underarm and you can't figure out why, that's the reason. You've got to curve this around. So here we go. Seam looks great here. Pivot. Pivot. Press everybody down. You can see I do a lot of holding with all my fingers to get the fabric where I want it before I top stitch it. Alright, now here's my tab, and you can see this seam is not pulled out all the way to the edge. It's in about 1/8. So I stick my little hook in there, pull it out all the way up to the curve. Now it looks pretty good. So I'm going to stitch it. As you go around, check to see if everybody's pulled out nice and smooth. Stop, pivot. This is right up to the edge here, so I think we're good. But I don't know, I like to check. Can be deceptive at times. Now I'm approaching the center back, and again I'm going to place it on my machine bed just the way it will lie when the shirt's finished. This looks pretty good. This doesn't look so smooth, so I'm going to shape it a little with my hook. This all looks good, so I can stitch that down. The more you stitch the shirt, the better chance you have of having the seams line up, because there's really no place for the fabric to go. I think it's in the beginning, it's the toughest. Now see, this one is tucked in. It's a very common place for the seam allowance to be tucked in. And if you look at your tabs on your shirt and you think, gee, they look awful skinny, it's because your seam allowances weren't pulled out to the edge. Okay, so here we go. Around, around. The next place for the seam allowance to usually be tucked in is right at that little curve on the front of the shirt. That's an important place to check. So I do that, and let's make sure I got everybody all lined up here. Looks pretty good. Okay, this looks good. Last couple of stitches around the curve. When I get back to the beginning where I started, I do maybe 2 stitches back, cut my thread, and I'm done. There is another video on how to sew on the Velcro. I go right into sewing my Velcro now. I have little templates that I use. This is the wrong size. I have a whole set of marking templates for my Velcro, all sizes. This is a D, so I want a D template, and I will take that and lay it on my shirt. And I have these little post-it tabs that happen to just fit right in there. So I stick a tab on, and that's where my Velcro is going to go. You can also use, I don't know if you call it that. Here's my placement guide. Put it on the front of the shirt. Stick a little Velcro tab in that slot. Remove that, and then I'll place my Velcro on the shirt. The first side I always sew is the flannel side behind my tab, because it's so easy to get the tab on the wrong side of the shirt. So here I would place that actually on the flannel side, so it's behind the tab. You need your softy Velcro behind the label. This can also be used as a template for cutting that Velcro, so you get it the right size. These are handy to have around. So you can watch the Velcro video, and hopefully this was helpful to you. If you have any questions, let me know.